Japan as a nation takes much effort to make sure that it's absolutely as modern as possible in terms of definitions or trends. Why is the Japanese nation so obsessed with keeping itself up to date with both Eastern and Western culture? The exact origins of the settlement of Japan are considered to be somewhat mysterious or not fully known, as historians don't exactly consider any real form of settlement to be interpreted in a single absolute way. What is known is that the first emperor of Japan was that of Jimmu, and it's considered that the start of the Japanese history was from this point in time, which was roughly considered to be that of 660 before the Common Era. What's particular is that there is archaeological evidence that the Japanese islands were settled far before that, with the Jomon-based culture from roughly 14,000 years to 300 years before the Common Era. So this prehistory overlaps, but there isn't much actual written records from this era in Japanese history. Before that, still human settlement is conventionally accepted to be that of roughly 30,000 years from the Common Era. A few settlements push back the settlement of Japan even further to roughly 40,000 to even 50,000 years before the Common Era, but there's not enough credible evidence to make this official. On these claims of settlement of Japan before 35,000 years are not considered to be reliable by credible scientists. Before Jimmu's ascension, all of Japanese history is considered to be in this time the reign of the gods. Within Japan, it's a matter of controversy or even blasphemous to question the existence of Jimmu, even though there isn't much actual evidence even to prove that he existed, either as a person or ruler. In the late 1100s, the feudal era of Japanese history commenced with the samurai on the different shogunates that controlled what is now considered Japan for centuries. Modern theorists have sometimes mentioned that Japan at the time was under an essential military dictatorship, with the samurai just controlling different regions of Japan. In the 1500s, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu essentially controlled what is now to be all of modern Japan. This was the first time that all of Japan was under the control of a single or group of individuals with a unified purpose. Before this, there was no real commonality in Japan or no unified Japan, as different regions had different rulers, as well as even different laws or customs. The Emperor of Japan was still symbolic, but had no real actual authority or premise. The smaller domains were the ones with the actual power or influence. When the United States of America came to Japan to formally establish relations with the shogunate rulers, Japan found itself vastly outdated when compared to the rest of Asia at the time. Japan was in a state reminiscent of how Asia was centuries previously, as it had outdated technology, inferior customs, as well as antiquated beliefs. One of the main reasons why Japan modernized itself so quickly was to avoid the fate of the other Asian nations impacted by European colonialism. Japan implemented what the European powers did in a matter of decades, when it had taken the colonial factions centuries to do. Japan is an archipelago with access to few natural resources. Imperial Japan's original plan was to seize territory in China for resources that would be sent to Japan to maintain an equal footing against the Western powers of the United States and Europe. And Japanese forces sought to go through Korea and into China for the resources. However, dynastic Korea wouldn't allow such massive amounts of soldiers or military equipment or technology moving to or from or even on its territory. This was a main reason why Korea was occupied annexed and partially assimilated by Japan. The Imperial Japanese authorities didn't plan on the Koreans resisting as long as they did or as roughly as they did. Resistance in China was also more severe than the Japanese had anticipated, on only Manchuria as a result was in full Japanese control, with other regions of China being under European influence, or Japan's reach to other regions of China or Northeast Asia were halted by Russian or American geopolitical influence. Japan faced a universal front of resistance from all forces, because these forces considered Japan to be unpredictable and even more of a hassle to deal with than China at the time. When Japan was defeated by the Allied powers and occupied by the United States after the Second World War, it was the first time that Japan had been occupied by a foreign power in centuries. Most Japanese citizens believed that the American forces would have been repulsed by the same divine weather that had driven back the Mongolians centuries before, but nothing of the sort had occurred. It was something of a Japanese sense of self that they were able to resist occupation by foreign powers, and for Japan to be occupied would mean that an essential part of their history, their culture, and even themselves were no longer valid in this modern, and more importantly, Western-dominated world. This was why the Japanese forces fought so fiercely to keep the Americans away from actual Japanese land. As when it eventually happened and Japan was occupied, the government as well as the people didn't believe it to be possible, but the United States and China sought to make sure that Japan could never again threaten the peace or even the stability of Northeast Asia for the foreseeable future, or for at least the next few generations. This was why the Americans modified the Japanese constitution to add a sense of bureaucratic slowdown to any chances that might desire or manifest within Japanese society to return to a state of governance or national identity that existed before 1945. In a modern post-Second World War Asia, Japan is still in many ways seen as the most advanced Asian nation due to decades of economic, social, and political stagnation in mainland China due to communist leadership. Japan is now seen as the main force to stop Chinese advancement through Asia, and if all else fails in terms of diplomacy or military influence, a buffer to Western interests. Even if China were to someday fully regain its strength that it had centuries previously, Japan will still be a power, regionally, nationally, and internationally, to reckon with. Whatever happens to Japan, it will undoubtedly be of their own doing or undoing.